Howdy there, everyone. Today we'll be looking at the Ottoman Hungarian Revolution. The revolution that gives you super grenadiers as well as over 800 HP Hussars, aka one of the funnest revolutions in the entire game. If you want revolutionaries with an extra 5 range, as well as grenadiers that can just make buildings completely evaporate when used in mass, this is the revolution for you. As the Ottomans, this is particularly strong because you have a lot of cards that you can send to make your grenadiers stronger and let them do more damage. As you can see here, mass grenadiers will completely melt almost anything that they come into contact with. As soon as you revolt, all of your villagers will turn into high-range skirmishers, and also you'll get access to these cards. A card that lets you spawn revolutionaries from outposts and also build outposts using those revolutionaries, a card that lets you spawn one Hagic from every outpost, a card that lets you spawn a grenadier from every outpost, a card that lets you spawn a Magyar Hussar from every outpost, a card that lets you send 5 Krabats, a card that lets you send 5 Panjors, a card that would let you send some boats on water, as well as the fort, and then your citizenship card. If you've ever played Romania, then you'll notice that Hungary and Romania share a lot of cards. The difference is that with Hungary, you get cards that boost your Hussars, turning them into Magyar Hussars, and you also have cards that boost your grenadiers, turning them into super high range grenadiers, as well as instead of just getting a tiny bit of extra health, you get 4 extra range on your revolutionaries, letting them outrange other skirms. As Hungary, you can use your Magyar Hussars to take out their skirmisher units, you can use them to take out their artillery, and due to their giant HP pool, you can almost treat them as cuirassiers, and if they have some musks or some pikes, then you can just put the Magyar Hussars into trample mode, and they'll actually trade quite effectively with units that are supposed to counter them, simply because they have a ridiculous amount of HP. You'll also see that your grenadiers will completely melt buildings provided you've sent the right cards, and also the 4 extra range on your revolutionaries gives them a huge edge in most late game battles. So you don't have to worry about constantly sending your goons forward and back or microing the way you would if you were playing as Romania. As Hungary, you can just turn off your brain pretty much, send in your giant force, and watch the enemy crumble. In other words, Hungary is a lot of fun to play. The one thing to remember as Ottomans is that throughout the entire game you've probably just been sending in Jans and Avis guns. So when you switch over to Hungary, make sure you build a stable if you haven't done that yet, and research upgrades for your Hussars, so that you can make the most out of the double HP upgrade that you get. You revolt as Hungary and your Hussars turn into Magyar Hussars. Make sure you build an arsenal as well, and research the upgrades there. The silver lining of that is that since you've probably just been spamming Janissaries and Obus guns the whole game, your enemy's probably going to be caught off foot when he's suddenly hit with giant swarms of Hussars that are as strong as cuirassiers. And of course, since you still have the Panjor and the Grabat card, if you choose to, then instead you can go for more of a mercenary type of setup by sending in a bunch of Grabats, which are basically Stratiots, and a bunch of Panjors, which are just like Jaegers, only 10% faster. So if you would prefer to go with those 2 hard-hitting mercenary units, as Hungary, you still have that option. And it's something you might find yourself doing later on in the game if you start to run out of food because you were mainly macroing for gold. Then you can just temporarily switch towards a mercenary focused setup, and then once you reset your macro to harvest more food, you can switch back to making Magyar Hussars and Grenadiers, which of course both cost food and gold. The only thing is that if you want to train your Panjors, aka your Jaegers, from towers and your barracks, then you have to send the 5 Panjor card, and if you want to train your Stratiots from your towers and also your stables, then you just have to remember to send the 5 Stratiots card. Once you do that, you'll be able to build them in mass. They cost nothing but gold. Just keep in mind that your Jaegers cost 2 pop, and your Stratiots cost more than 2 pop. So you won't be able to mass them in the same numbers that you could mass, say, a Hussar and a Grenadier setup. However, in the late game, you're going to have a lot of gold, so sometimes switching to mercenaries for a short period of time isn't a bad idea. Also, your Stratiots are faster than your Hussars, so sometimes you might want to have a few of those just to catch units that are faster than your Hussars. You might also want to build Stratiots if you want a fast unit that you can quickly send across your enemy's back line to get at their eco like their fortresses. Meanwhile, your fully upgraded Magyar Hussars will be slower than Stratiots, but they can act as both a meat shield and a sledgehammer, letting you roleplay as those old AoE 3 legacy French players who would just spam giant blocks of cuirassiers from Fortress Age onwards, doing that non-stop until either they won the game or you destroyed their economy. With Hungary, you can do pretty much the same thing. Or instead, you can just mass an obscene amount of grenadiers and then watch every single unit that the enemy sends your way evaporate as they are hit by a giant wall of explosions. Both are perfectly valid. Personally, I like to mix the two together. I create a decent amount of Magyar Hussars to act as the meat shields, put them in trample mode if they get pulled into melee, and then I back things up with a giant swarm of grenadiers, and then I use those 4 extra range skirmishers in the back line to help snipe any units that I'm worried about or just to generally add more firepower. And once you send in your Grenzer card, your Grenzers, your extra 4 range skirmisher revolutionaries, they can also build your towers, which you can then use as a drop-off point for more shipments, as well as a spot. Build a lot of your units. After you send the Panjur card, you'll be able to send your Fast Jaegers. After you send the Krabat card, you'll be able to build Krabats from there. You'll also be able to, of course, build more of your extra 4 range Grenzers. You won't be able to build your Grenadiers or your Magyar Hussars, so that is one thing you have to build by your towers. You'll have to put in stables for your Magyar Hussars and artillery for your Grenadiers, but most of your infantry needs will be taken care of by your Revolutionaries, as well as your Panjurs and your Hajiks if you need them. So unless you've gone all in on Janissaries and just gone every single Janissary card that you could possibly get, you won't even have to build that many barracks once you go as Hungary, because they just have so many great infantry options to choose from that you can build right from your tower once you send the right cards. Which will let you put together a flexible army that has a good amount of ranged skirmishers and a good amount of powerful melee cavalry. So if you see your enemy has a bunch of artillery parked over by some buildings, then you can just quickly send in either your Stratiots or your Magyar Hussars to clear them out, well, your super high range Grenzers and your ultra cheap Hajiks or your slightly more expensive but powerful Jaegers clear out everything else, and any Grenadiers that you've also built take care of any towers or high HP buildings. If you go with the Ottoman civilization before you revolt as the Hungarians, then you'll have no shortage of cards that increase the damage that artillery does as well. So the Otto Hungarian Revolution is a very effective counter against opponents that like to just send their base in turtle, hoping that their towers, their culverins, their numerous other weapons will be able to stop you. It won't. You have 800 HP Hussars, you have swarms of high-range Grenadiers, you're going to get through, and you're going to kill some people. 9 stars out of 10, because it's very hard to stop someone from knocking down your door when they have super high HP Hussars sieging down your wall. And also, those are just as cheap as regular Hussars, so even if they manage to wipe out that group of super high HP Hussars, you can just send in a new group to either go through that hole in the wall, or go through another one. They are in a very, very bad situation, while you are in a very fun one. It's a good time. A lot of people just think of Hungary as a coup de grace or a meme move to pull on an opponent after you've already beaten them. Just when you want to beat them into the ground with your super Hussars and your Grenadiers. And that is true, you can do that, but if you simply view them as a meme supreme revolutionary option, you are missing out. If you're able to reboom by sending cards that let you build extra town centers, and of course making plenty of plantations so that you can quickly build up a bunch of settlers, once you send a card that lets you train settlers, then you can quickly reboom and turn them into a legitimate late game threat. Just remember that with this revolutionary option, your villagers will cost coin, not food like some other revolutionary options, so your macro for rebooming is going to focus a lot more on plantations rather than granaries, which tends to be how most players tend to skew in the late game anyways, since you're building more high coin units, such as cannons, mercenaries, or other units with a higher coin cost. Rebooming after you do that revolution, and all of your villagers turn into those high-range revolutionaries, it's not that much different. You just have to take your multiple town centers and then make a bunch of citizens pop out. They'll cost gold, and then boom bam, you can get your eco gold again. And with that eco, you'll be able to make more of your high HP Hussars, you'll be able to make more of your Super Grenadiers, and you'll be able to keep the fun times rolling. Just be advised that your Grenadiers will have trouble holding up against masses of shock infantry, masses of Hussars, or just giant masses of high damage infantry that got in too close. So if you find yourself being completely swarmed, you might have to swap up your strategy a bit, at least until you can get the better of your opponent. So unless you want to try and kite with your Grenadiers, I recommend that you lean more on your tower defenses while you try and rebuild your strength. Against mindless infantry swarms, you can build a decent gun line using Jaegers or other ranged infantry, and have those be backed up by your towers as well as your fortresses. Your towers will be able to build certain units if you send the right cards, and also your fortresses will be able to build units as well, letting you slowly move down the map and push forward. And as you kill more and more units, you'll earn more shipments, which will let you send in more units of your own, and it will also let you send in more forts, which will help you to solidify your map control. Now, of course, against some civs you'll have to deal with howitzers. If they do that, then all you have to do is build some Kravats, aka Stratiots, or some Magyar Hussars from your fort, and send those behind to take care of the howitzers. Against civilizations that really like to swarm you, you might find that even your Jaegers and your Grenadiers simply aren't enough. You're taking out giant swaths of infantry, but you're just not killing them fast enough. If that's the case, then you might need to adapt your strategy, simply because Jaegers do take up more than one pop, so they'll often be outnumbered if you're going against an opponent that likes to swarm with one pop infantry. So Jaegers are a good defense tool, as are Grenadiers, but if they're just sending giant waves of unit down your throat, then you might have to adjust your tactics just a little bit as you fight for map control in the late game. In late game blob fights, that is where your extra range revolutionaries will come in, as well as your Hajiks. Now, those two units require slightly different macro if you're actually building them, with Hajiks costing gold, whereas your revolutionaries cost food. However, at this late in the game, where you're just going swarm on swarm, you'll find that you don't actually have to build that many revolutionaries, as the sheer amount of units that you're killing in these blob fights will often give you enough points for a shipment. Every time you get a shipment, you'll be able to also place down a new outpost, because as Hungary, like Romania, you get one free outpost with every shipment, so you'll be able to slowly move down the map that way, using your outposts as strong points that you can also use to build units, such as your Hajuks, or your Jaegers, or your Kravats, once you send the right cards. So even against an opponent with a super strong late game eco like Inca, once they have all their concha houses up, you'll be able to slowly march forward. And this is where your Hajuks will start to shine, because they only take up one pop, and they only cost 110 gold, and your eco is probably macro towards gold at this point. So the Hajuks might end up being your main counter to swarms of infantry that you're going to run into. And then you can also supplement your Hajuks by sending in free shipments of your Grenzers once that shipment pops up, which you can do whenever your population drops below 200. So if it's 199, that's when you can send in your new revolutionary shipment, one of which will spawn from every outpost. And if this is the late game, you might have as many as 40 outposts up. Late game Hungary is an experience. You'll see World War I style tactics, where you have giant blobs of your Hajuks just slamming into giant enemy formations, and when the dust settles, you'll easily run into situations where you've built over 600 revolutionaries, and who knows how many Magyar Hussars and Hajuks, and by the end of the game, half of the entire map will be your color. What can I say? Hungary is a heck of a revolution. I recommend you do it, go out there, and have fun, everyone.